family, and then we'll grow from there. And I'll pick through the questions, and you generated ideas and thoughts from those. Please don't feel like you have to answer anything that you don't want to answer, or if anything makes me uncomfortable, please tell me, because I oftentimes don't know. And then if there's something that then that triggers you to talk about too, bring it.
Okay.
Okay, because it's truly going to help me get to know you and get to know your journey and your healing from that, and your ability to be able to, I think, influence other people and help them understand a broader term that we can get through these challenges of life.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Bill, you let us know when you're ready. Oh,
I'm ready. We're rolling.
All right, so Meghan, if you would state your full name, please, for us, as you would like it to be remembered.
My name is Meghan Elizabeth Lee. My birthday is October 24th, 1984, and I was born in San Diego, California.
Awesome. So I want you to tell us a little bit about your family. I'd like to know, first of all, if you have any siblings.
I had 2 half-brothers. One of them passed away when he was 17 and I was 5. And my other half-brother just turned 53 or 52 this year.
And are you close with your brother?
We're working on having a relationship. I didn't see him for about 25 years.
By your choice?
By his. We kind of lost him for a while.
And what about your parents? Are they still alive?
Yes.
And what is your relationship like with your parents?
It's pretty good with my dad these days. It's all right with my mom.
Okay. And we might come back to that a little bit more when we just talk about your journey. So the first thing I really want to know is, I know that you're part of a program here with NAMI. And so what is your diagnosis?
I have major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety.
And when you were a child, did you realize that there was something going on that goes along with this diagnosis?
Yeah, I knew that there was something wrong. I didn't know what it was or why it was wrong. I just knew that I had something that other kids and even the adults didn't seem to. I just thought in different ways. And
can you think of a circumstance that you were in as a child that could define that for you?
I think the biggest thing that I knew was off, and I never talked to anyone about it because we just didn't talk a lot in my family, but that subliminal thing that you pick up when you're a kid about what is and isn't okay to talk about in the household. By the time I was 7 or 8, I didn't know what it was. I do now. I was having suicidal ideation. I didn't actively want to kill myself because I couldn't grasp that concept. I was too young. But I remember going to bed and not wanting to wake up, and waking up and being upset that I woke up. And that was just how it was.
And did you deal with that on your own, or did you share that with any friends or anyone at school?
No, I didn't share that. I know after my brother's death when I was 5, that had a profound effect on me. And I think that's what caused things to start as young as they did.
How old was he when he passed away?
17.
How did he pass away?
His heart stopped.
And were you when that happened?
Kind of. He'd passed away in his sleep. We were all up at a skiing trip.
I'm sorry, can I stop? I'm getting a lot of static out of that microphone. I'd like to change it out if I could.
Yeah.
Boy, that's tough.
Yeah.
And did they know that he had a heart
Yes. Well, they didn't know that he had a heart ailment. When he was a baby, he had a brain tumor that destroyed his pituitary gland. And so he was on HGH from the time that he was like 5 or 6. And human growth hormone is terrible on the human body, especially on children, if you have to go synthesize. To grow, right? And if you don't have a pituitary gland, there's nothing in your body secreting to make it grow. So he would have stayed the same size as when he had the tumor, and he had the tumor when he was 3 or 4.
You want to give me a test?
Hello, how are you doing today, sir?
Are you still rolling?
Yeah.
You're so good. So we talked about your brother, and what was his name?
Matthew.
Matthew. And so your brother, that's now 57, now
Yeah, 52 or
52.
53, yeah.
What is his name?
Douglas.
Douglas. And has Douglas had a journey similar to yours?
I don't know. My entire generation, like my brothers and my cousins on both sides of the family, we kind of all got hit with it in one way or another. And Douglas has never mentioned anything specifically, but he had drug problems and still does, which tends to be happen a lot co-occurring, where you have mental health problems that you cover up with drugs, or you do drugs that cause mental health problems. So I think he's somewhere along that line. I think it's incredible that he's gotten to the age that he has while still being a drug user. But he has a job that he's kept down for over 8 years, and he's pays rent and buys groceries and, goes out and does stuff. So he's very functional.
Meghan, you seem really intelligent, and so I would imagine that at 7 or 8, when you were dealing with these suicidal thoughts and all of these things that are happening, did you try to solve those problems for yourself?
I tried to ignore them as much as I could.
And so there's a pivotal moment in all of our lives, more than one oftentimes. What would be that first pivotal moment for you as a child where you feel like you could no longer hide this? And
I actually was really good at hiding it. I started self-harming when I was 12, and my parents didn't find out until I was 16. So I kept everything under wraps for a long time, because it just wasn't talked about. You don't talk about stuff like that.
And were you still going to school every day? And
I hated going to school. I had a terrible time. Like, I'd have friends here and there, but I just didn't get along with other kids very well. I got along with adults better.
did you have any close friends in school?
I'd have one for a few months, but I was very, and in some ways, I don't know. Like I said, I didn't fit in with the kids. I thought they were foolish, or I myself was too immature at the same time to handle having relationships with other kids. So I just didn't react well to certain situations. So I had trouble, like I'd have a friend for a grade, and then the next grade I'd have a different friend.
As a child, did you see yourself, some of us, I always thought I'd be an actor, right? That's all I want to do. So as a child, was there a dream job or career that you wanted to have?
I wanted to be an astronaut
An
or an
astronaut.
astronomer.
So, being an astronaut to you, what would that entail?
Would mean I get to go on board a rocket and go out into space.
And why did you want to go out into space?
Because we don't know what's out there.
You, last time we talked about the telescope lens of looking back into the past.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell me that piece again?
Okay, so there's this known theory that, we know roughly where the center of the universe is. And if you point a telescope at the center of the universe, you're kind of looking back in time because light travels outwards and you're catching the light as it travels out. Well, in theory, if you got a powerful enough telescope, you could see back to the Big Bang because light's still traveling out from that. And I found as I've gotten older, it's like I've gotten a more powerful telescope on my own life. And as I get older, weird things that I did when I was a kid make sense because I was struggling with all this stuff. And when you're a kid, you don't have the answers or have access to the knowledge or know how to go about figuring out what's going on. You just kind of try to keep your head above water. And in the last 5 years, I reached a point where I could look back at my childhood and be like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. It makes sense why I was having suicidal thoughts at such a young age. It makes sense why I had trouble fitting in with the other kids. Because when Matthew died, like I said, I was 5. Children at the age of 5 are still in magical thinking, as opposed to concrete thinking that adults have. In magical thinking, there's not really room for things like death and things like stuff ending forever. And I think having that happen at a young age to someone I was so close to, in some ways it made me grow up faster, and in some ways it made me hold on to that magical thinking longer.
So, you think when you're a child that you want to be an astronaut and have pieces of that come to fruition for you? Are there pieces of being an astronaut now that you're doing as an adult, even though you're not out in space?
I still like new adventures and exploring. My husband and I do that a lot. He's a complete rocket nerd. So we're actually going this weekend out to a rocketry launch at the Black Rock Desert. So we're going to go watch people hopefully not blow stuff up. Blow stuff up in a direction.
That's a good place to do it, actually.
Yes.
Blow stuff up.
Mm-hmm.
So, oftentimes when mental illness really kicks in, there's a moment where our lives tend to kind of fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have that experience as well?
I guess it was such a slow progression for me, and I grew up with it. So it's like that sibling that you don't like, but they're still there all the time. You just get used to it. So when I was younger, I didn't have any oh, I'm suddenly depressed and everything's falling apart. Because for me, for so long, it was just always like that. Like some of the light had been sucked out of my life. And it was like that for years. As an adult, I've had instances where it's like, oh, fuck, I'm really depressed. My life is falling apart. But there wasn't like one singular crash. I think the closest I could have to that would be 2 years ago, my husband and I decided to try and have children. So the doctor I was with at the time titrated me off my medicine. I didn't even completely make it off my meds before I fell apart. And it has taken most of the last 2 years to get myself put back together from that.
Do you still want to try to have children?
We've talked about adopting eventually, but we've decided not to have biological children because I can't get off my meds, so I can't be pregnant.
When did you start taking medication?
When I was 18.
And did you go and seek that out?
I was in Boston in college, and my depression, I guess being away from home, my depression overwhelmed me because there wasn't anything to keep me in check or keep me on a schedule. And I knew I was having trouble, so I went to the campus doctor and asked for a referral. And he just thought I was a fruit basket, so he gave me like Prozac or Paxil or something and a referral to a therapist in like 3 weeks. So I started on Paxil, and 3 weeks later I saw the therapist for the first time, and 4 weeks later I was in a psych ward. Because I think the Paxil gave me just enough energy, came back enough out of the depression that I got really destructive. And one night I got into an argument with a friend, and I cut myself up pretty bad. And he knew that I was doing it. And he told me either he would call the police and send them to my dorm and make a scene, or I could go to the RM, the head of the floor, and tell her what happened and have her send me to the hospital. So I opted for that because I didn't want a scene. And they admitted me, I admitted myself, because they said it would be easier to get out, as opposed to them admitting me against my will.
And how long were you there?
About a week.
When you went in, did you have fear of the moniker of this is a psych ward? And
In some ways, it was a relief. I didn't have to hide it anymore. And I was somewhere where they acknowledged it was a real problem. And I wasn't alone for the first time. I was locked up in a ward with people who were just like me.
And with those people that were just like you, offering solace and figuring that out, were you able to dig deeper into how to better handle what was happening to you?
No, that took years. I mean, I ended up in the psych ward once, but I continued cutting myself into my mid-20s. For me, it was a pressure relief. It sounds counterintuitive if you haven't looked into the reason behind self-injury, but it actually prevented me from killing myself. It was like a pressure valve.
So you say that you were in college at
Yeah.
that time in Boston. Did you return to college?
No.
How did that feel?
That felt like a big failure. I had to go back to Arizona. I was living with my parents again. I was working for my parents again. And it felt like I was never going to get out of that town.
What were you studying in college?
Psychology.
And do you feel like when you were studying psychology, it was starting to open some things up for you that you were realizing?
I studied some psychology, like when I was in high school, just reading books, this and that. A lot of it made sense to me. I guess I was probably studying it partially to figure out what was going on with me. A lot of psych students do. A lot of people go into psychology because they themselves or their family members or someone close to them has problems. And it's the first way to start figuring out what's going on with yourself.
Did you see any of these traits in your parents?
Not in my father. I've seen over the years some traits in my mother from her mother.
And did she have an understanding of what was happening with you?
It took both of them a long time and varying times to come to terms with what was happening to me. My dad's initial reaction, because my parents were older when they had me, so I'm almost a generation behind. So my dad's generation, he's 75 now, was very much, well, suck it up and go on. And my mom didn't understand why I was having these problems, but she very much, and to this day, blames herself.
Are they a support system for you?
Yes. Yes, especially over the last 2 years with the whole pregnancy attempt, and I've spent more time with my parents in the last 2.5 years than I had in the previous 15.
Nice. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
When somebody says to you, or you see somebody say to somebody else, suck it up and deal with it, what would be your response to that?
Next, you can go over and tell someone with epilepsy to suck it up and stop having seizures. It's about as effective.
So, the disease of mental illness, some people do feel that that if people would just calm down and eliminate the drama from their lives.
Yeah, my doctor told me actually recently that the reason I had anxiety is because I don't breathe properly.
So, as a patient, as someone who's dealing with something like that, more than how does that make you feel, what's your best route of helping yourself with that?
It's a lot easier to deal with now because I understand there's a lack of knowledge and a certain amount of generational and institutional ignorance around the subject. Because even my general practitioner, while he was in school, he had a psych rotation of like a week. But he obviously doesn't understand, that you can't fix anxiety by breathing. I mean, yes, breathing exercises will help when you're having an anxiety attack, but it doesn't stop the fact that your brain is exploding. That's what it feels like to me. It feels like my head is this big and my brain is that big and it's going to burst out.
And you are medicated now?
Yes, happily so. I love my meds. I'm not functional without my medication and my treatment.
How long did it take you to find what some people call that cocktail? That's a weird way of putting it. How long did that take?
I've had it on and off over the years. I'm med compliant. That means I willingly and on time take my meds, but I'm physically med resistant. That means that my body starts rejecting medication. So I've had the problem of a med will work for a year or two, and then the medication starts wearing off. My body just doesn't respond the same way to it. And I either have to increase the dosage or change medication, which is hell if you have to change medication, because you have to go off of one and then go up on another, so you have this valley where you're in the middle of, and it sucks. The medication that I'm on now is phenomenal, but I'm also on a treatment unit. It's called an alpha stim. It's this little electronic unit, and I hook electrodes up to my ears, and it sends a mild electrical pulse through the base of my brain.
And you found that helps you?
I found it's exceptionally helpful.
How often do you use it?
Twice a day for 20 minutes.
And you were going to say something else.
It's probably one of the best things I've ever had. It's been life-changing.
What, if I say, what's your support system? So for you, Meghan, right now in your life, it feels like you've found a good place.
I have. I'm actually, the world is shiny again in a way that it hasn't been since I was very, very young. My support network, it's my husband, of course. He is like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And we've got our cats, our babies, and then my brother and his wife live in Reno. And then I also have Laura and her family. They're my main support network here. And then my mom and my dad.
You didn't mention any physician in that.
Oh, yeah, I also have my awesome therapist, Mickey, and my great psychiatrist, Dr. Reed. They keep everything running under the covers.
Again, I'm going to go back to your intelligence. So in a lot of your description of how your meds change and you realize that your body is rejecting it or not, it's not working anymore, is it you're making that realization personally?
Yeah, because I notice, things happen. It gets harder to get out of bed. I'm upset more often. I cry over things that shouldn't bother me. I just start feeling more depressed or caring less. Because for me, depression isn't being sad. For me, depression is sad is up here and not feeling anything is down here. And I'm like way down here. I'm past the point of caring about feeling anything. I don't care if I get up. I don't care if I get dressed. I don't care if I lose my job. I don't care if the cats have food. I can't. It's like nothing works.
And then are you able yourself to then pick up a phone and call the doctor?
Usually once it gets that bad, if I haven't noticed it, someone else does. Like, we have routines that we use as soft checks. Like, for instance, my dad, his way of keeping track of me is seeing how early in the morning I text him. If I text him between 6 and 7, because I try and get up at 6, if I text him between 6 and 7 in the morning, he knows I'm having a good day. If he doesn't hear from me until 8 or 9, he knows either I have a cold or something's going on.
You talk about your husband. How long have you known him?
Let's see, we've been married for 2 years next May. We met in 2016, so that's 3 years now.
How did you meet?
Through OkCupid.
Oh, that's adorable. Okay,
Yes.
Cupid.
Yes, my brother, my best friend, made me join a dating app. It was terrible, but I found Randy, so.
So, a dating app. That's an interesting story. So, were you resistant about that at first?
Initially, I was like, this is not going to work. It is going to be full of creepy loser guys. But okay, by the way, you're coming with me. I would like screenshot messages and send them to my friend and be like, this is what you've done. These are the losers of the internet.
So, did you go on any initial dates before you found Randy?
No, actually, I was chatting with a couple guys. It's kind of funny. I signed up on a Saturday, and Randy messaged me on Sunday.
So one day later.
Yeah, one day later, he wrote me a book. I had a rule, if all the guy does is say hi or you're sexy or something along those lines, I deleted and blocked them. If you don't make the minimal effort to read the biography, because I actually filled out the stupid biography, I'm not going to talk to you. So a couple guys were like, oh, I saw this and da-da, and they'd write like that much, and I was like, okay, I'll chat back. Randy wrote me a small novella about my entire biography and how it applied to him. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. He at least took 20 minutes out of his time, so that's worthwhile. And then we started chatting, and the next week, because I signed up at the beginning of February, so maybe it was a couple weeks later, it was a Sunday, and I wanted to go play pool and have a beer at Little 5 Points. And because that was right by where I lived. I was on the south side of Atlanta in a bad neighborhood, but it was a nice apartment complex. I was not very aware. And all the other guys I was chatting with, I was like, pool and beer. And they were like, no, that's too much pressure. I don't want to go today. And I was like, oh, it's Valentine's Day. Shit. So I was like, okay. And I messaged Randy. I was like, do you want to go play pool and get beer? And he was the only one that said yes. So we ended up meeting up that night. And I was so nervous, and so was he. And we had a really good time. And the entire following week, we chatted incessantly on the phone, and even had a couple of phone calls. And the next Friday night, we went out, and we just didn't stop after that.
And your first date was Valentine's Day?
Yes, we actually got married on Valentine's Day because I decided that was our anniversary, and I actually remembered it, and I didn't want to change the date because I knew we'd forget it.
Had you ever had a relationship with somebody before Randy?
Yes.
You had. So if I say, what does love mean to you? That's a pretty big question. But oftentimes it's how we feel from that, or how people treat us from that. So what does love mean to you?
With Randy, love is, he's the first person who's not made me feel bad for being myself.
You say that he took the time to read about you.
Yeah.
And to then address those things. How do you felt like someone had ever taken that much time outside of your family to get to know you before that?
No, not really, not right off the bat like that. Usually when you get to know people, it takes time or a lot of conversations, and they don't necessarily pick or want to know. And it was kind of an ongoing theme with my various relationships, because everyone eventually knew that I had mental illness, and I never tried to hide it. But the general consensus was, that's cool as long as you don't get sick. So I don't mind you being crazy as long as you're just a little crazy. And so that was always a hard spot to move past, because even though I still had the relationships, because I was young and insecure and wanted someone around, it was lacking that trust, because it was like, yeah, I'm here, but if there's a big problem, you handle it on your own. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the things that usually most of my relationships led to them not working out, was I would just get tired of that.
Right. You talked a little bit about labels in a way. And we are all labeled as things.
Yes.
Not, right? So from the inside, we might have a different perspective. But for you, what are some labels you feel like people have laid on you?
Crazy. People think if you're crazy that you're somehow broken or not enough. definitely a whole lot of feeling not enough.
If you could help somebody understand, so people retract, they pull away if they feel extreme things come up.
Right.
If you were able to give advice to say, hey, this might come up, but here are some things that you could do to help in that situation and also ease your fear.
I think the main thing with mental health that people don't understand is that mental health is physical health. It's having any sort of mental health issue is the same thing as having epilepsy or having any other disorder of the brain or disorder of the body where stuff just doesn't work right. So it should be treated the same as if you had the flu or as if you had cancer. You seek out treatment for it. You receive support from people. People tell you, yay, you're doing a good job fighting, not suck it up, why are you acting like that? And I think if people viewed it more as just a general physical health issue, then that would go a long way towards understanding that, oh no, this isn't something that someone is making up. This is something that's actually happening. I mean, you get the flu and someone sends you a get well card. You get cancer and finish chemo and everyone's like, yay, you're such a fighter. I have a suicide attempt and people ask, what the fuck's wrong with you? Why did you do that? Why would you do that? And it's like, well, instead of having cancerous cells that are trying to destroy my liver, I have a brain that's trying to kill me.
So sometimes we feel like people are pushing our buttons a little bit. What would you say were your buttons?
Being disregarded once people find out that I have an illness. Being thought less of, being thought I'm less intelligent, being thought I don't have impulse controls, or just being treated like a child.
So we're at NAMI right now.
Yes,
Great.
the greatest place ever.
Right. So I want to ask, when did NAMI first come into your life?
That was when we were living in Georgia before we got married, when we were in the early part of our relationship, me and my husband. I told him that I had mental illness, and we were looking for support networks as well as education for both of us. And there was a NAMI group in Atlanta that had a family support group. So Randy went to that a couple of times. And then when we moved out here, we found that there was a lot more NAMI. And there was a support group for both of us. So we both started going, and I volunteered for the state office for a while. And then after we moved out to Fernley, I shifted over to Western Nevada and started volunteering here.
And from there, it's become something that you do weekly, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. And what do you do when you come in?
I do the bookkeeping.
Which is wonderful.
I figure even though I'm not actually out there like doing the soft skills helping people, because I'm doing the books, I'm helping. That's one less thing that Laura and everyone else has to do so they can go do their job.
So from an outside perspective and just getting to know this organization over the last year since, last November when Sarah invited me into this world, it seems that NAMI does a great job utilizing people who have endured mental illness and to then be able to heal through that and then serve the community. I want to know more about that.
Yeah, so I've taken several of the training classes, both because I'm interested in being able to help, and they're also educational for me and for my family about my health. I've taken Ending the Silence. I'm a peer-to-peer group coordinator, so I can help run those, stuff like that. And I think the reason NAMI is so successful is you're taking people with lived experiences who have gotten to a point in their life. I don't want to say that I'm better. I want to say that I'm no longer drowning in my illness. Because I don't think I'm as ill as I used to be. And part of that is because I'm around people who have similar lived experiences, and together it makes it less crappy.
And do you feel like being able to, and I feel like this too as I get older, being able to turn around and serve others, kind of get out of your own way?
Yeah, that's why my favorite program is the Ending the Silence. That's the one where we go into high schools and junior highs, because that was such a huge point in my life when I was struggling by myself. That, it's one of those, you can't go out and save everyone, but if you can help one person, then you've changed the whole world for that person. So I figure even if I can just help one person or one kid not go down the same road that I did, or at least if they're going to go down it, to know that they're not alone. Because that's the biggest thing, is because mental illness isn't talked about, most of the suffering is done in silence. Whether it starts when you're a child, or starts when you're 20, or starts when you're in your 40s, you're all alone. And there's no other illness that leaves you so alone. And at NAMI, I'm not by myself. I have someone I can make terrible, crazy jokes with.
And you talk about the stigma and and then the Ending the Silence program.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that the idea of anonymity has changed quite a bit.
Yes, it used to be you didn't talk about it. I've come 180 degrees, and I will stand up on a chair in the middle of a room and yell at people about it, because I feel so lucky to be alive still. When it comes down to it, I want to be alive, and my brain doesn't. That part of my brain doesn't, and it actively works that way. So I now actively work in the opposite direction. I want to tell everyone about mental health, and tell everyone about NAMI, and tell everyone that it gets better. Because there was no one yelling when I was a kid. There was no one when I was 7 and 8, and there's no one when I was 17. And even when I was 25, it was still awfully quiet. It wasn't talked about. I've reached the point where it's like, I'm still alive. I don't care. I'm going to be really loud. Because people may look at me funny, but someone may look at me funny and then go home and be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it'll affect them. Maybe it'll affect their children or a friend.
And offer some kind of a resource, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you talk so much about feeling alone, I think that's part of it, right?
And I want people to know it's like, hey, there is all this stuff out here. There's all this information and all these people. And even though this is a really terrible thing, you can go through it with others. And it makes it suck a little less.
Right. You're good with numbers. You know a lot of data. Is there a ratio of population of people who are dealing with mental illness?
1 in 5.
1 in 5 people dealing with mental illness. Is there a ratio of how many of those people actually are able to get help?
Part of that depends where you live. Part of that depends upon your resources. Nevada is 51st in the country for mental health. It's a really bad place to be sick. I'm very fortunate. I have a strong support network. I have good insurance. I have money. I can find the assistance that I need. Not everyone is that fortunate. If you don't have insurance, if you don't have good insurance, if you don't have enough money, if you don't live in the city where there's a doctor, there are so many barriers to getting help. And there's a lot of bad doctors out there. Even in psychology, there's a lot of people who are in psychology, and God knows why, because they just don't seem to understand that this stuff is happening. Or they're like, oh, they treat you like you're an illness instead of a person. That's my biggest thing with doctors and with insurance and with everything else. They treat you like a number point.
You said last time we talked about having to check the boxes with prescription and in terms of what your diagnosis is. Will you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, when you go in, you're diagnosed usually. And your diagnosis carries a code that insurance companies use. And that's how your insurance decides what treatment, what doctors, what medications you qualify for. Which is frustrating. Like, personally, I respond well off-label. I have depression and anxiety, but I respond really well to bipolar medication. But I'm not bipolar. I just do well on the meds, off-label. But insurance won't cover it. So I had years where I was fighting, and my doctor was fighting with my insurance company, because it's like, hey, this stuff works. But they wouldn't cover it because it wasn't in my code.
So there's a lot of limitations in what happens when we have to go through the medical system.
Mm-hmm.
And you seem to live independently and enjoy being an adult. And
Yes.
Adulting is hard for anybody.
Adulting is hard.
It's just hard.
And it's not always fun.
It's not. Have you always been able to live independently?
Yes, I actually spent a good part of my 20s living by myself. The only time I wasn't able to live independently really has been on and off the last few years as I've been recovering from the whole pregnancy attempt, medicine change. Because when he put me back on my meds that he was trying to take me off, they didn't work anymore. Because that's a common thing that happens. If you go off of medicine, the next time you try it, it may not work. Because your brain's already been rewired.
And the medicine basically hits the brain chemistry, but does it also deal with the whole body?
Yes. Every time I go through a med change, I gain weight. And it's not just like, oh, we'll go and exercise, and because exercise is good for depression anyways. It's like I watch what I eat, I go to the gym, and I don't lose weight. It's just kind of there. So that's one of the body image things I've had to come to terms with.
So we talked a little bit about success. So one of my questions was, what's your successes, which is great.
Yeah.
I like your response very much. So let's first start by saying, what do you think of as success for you?
It depends on the day. Sometimes success is working all day or getting a project done. Sometimes it's getting out of bed. I've had to greatly change what I view as success and as value, because over the last couple years, I used to work 70 hours a week. I'd have a couple jobs at a time. I just trucked along and everything was okay. Ever since a couple years ago, I almost went on disability. I can't work full time anymore. I can't handle the stress of it. So as someone who used to view success as working 2 jobs and 70 hours a week and going to school and having a degree and all of this, if I can't do that, does that mean I'm never successful again? Does that mean I don't have any value anymore because I can't do what I did 5 years ago? So, yeah, success is whatever you get done during the day. If it's getting up out of bed and putting on clothes, that's a good day. If it's going and working for 4 hours, that's a good day. If all I manage to do is crawl out to the couch in my pajamas and sit with the cats all day, that's good enough. I mean, not every day is a huge success, and it's like, yeah, I have a college degree, so what? Doesn't change anything.
Do you feel like you used your degree?
Yeah, I do. It's where I learned how to do accounting. I don't know if it was worth all the money I spent on it.
Right.
But I don't think that it's necessarily makes me more successful. My husband doesn't have a college degree, and his earning potential is 3 times mine because of the field he's in. So, I mean, I don't view that as a sign of success. Plus, I'm sure you do too. There's always the bottom of the class. There's the doctor at the head of the class. But that also means that there was the doctor at the bottom of the class who graduated. Right. So you can get a degree and still not know anything.
And end up with a doctor at the bottom of the class.
Exactly.
And success, I think, too, I keep saying that, getting older. I said that to Bill all the way down here. Sometimes I think when we're younger, we deem success as a label, right?
It is,
right?
Yeah.
And then as we get older, defining it for you,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of your journey has been in dealing with the suicidal thoughts.
Yes.
And so the success of you being able to get up in the mornings and truly live this life and this beautiful, relationships and serving the community is so beautiful. Turning that around and being able to influence other people in what you're doing, I just think is so beautiful.
Well, thank you.
And I think then defining success for any of us has to come from in here as opposed to out there.
I think success is what makes you feel happy and makes you feel complete.
Yeah. I would love to know about the symbolism and the meaning of your tattoo.
This is my Don Quixote, which is one of my favorite books, Don Quixote de la Mancha. And this is actually the Picasso painting, the scribbly one. And I have sunflowers around the base of him from my grandfather, because when I was a kid, he always used to stop the car and cut sunflowers for me. The story of Don Quixote it's a Spanish story. And basically this older, well-off gentleman went crazy one day reading too many books. And he decided that he lived a couple hundred years before and he was a knight errant, as he referred to himself. And he went out on all these adventures and got into fights with windmills and did all this foolish things because he thought he was somewhere in someone else. And it's a sad story in a way at the end, because he does go back home and realizes that he's not quite who he thinks he is. But I always loved it because that much bravery, going about everything, even if no one else can see why you're tilting at these windmills, still doing it because it has meaning to you and not being afraid of it. He was seeing these giants, and instead of running away, he charged them. And I always loved that. And, this is I also have Fear No Giants. That's my dad's handwriting. But I got it based off the books, and it's basically just because I have my own giants. That's my health. That's my brain. But you can't live being afraid of it. So I would rather be crazy and tilt at the windmills than have everyone else be right.
If you could give advice to your 7-year-old self, what would you tell her?
It'll be good again one day.
You want to have children?
I would love to have children.
And what part of being a mother do you yearn to be able to share with a child?
We're going to adopt at some point. I just want to help. Sorry, my phone was buzzing. I want to give a child a chance to have a good life, to be happy, and to find out what that means for them. I don't want them to have to worry about things when they're a child. I just want them to enjoy it. Ultimately, my plan, because at our current velocity with business and work and everything else, we probably won't be adopting for another 15, 20 years. And I'm not going to want to deal with a baby at that point because I enjoy sleeping. So I'm just going to start adopting teenagers. You know, the ones that are about to age out of the system that no one wants to adopt because teenagers.
At the height of their hormones.
At the height of their hormones. But then I'm going to have a whole flock of 20-year-olds. But it's like, hey, come on, I may only have you for a couple years, but you're still going to be my kids forever. Once you're 18, you're not going to get kicked out. Because that's what I hate, is they think when you're 18, you're an adult. And that's not true. I don't think that you have your shit together until you're at least 25 or 30. And to say, hey, you're 18, good luck and Godspeed, that's terrible. I still depend on my parents, and I'm 35.
Do you work with kids right now?
No.
Or is that something that you would like to do?
I think it'd be fun. I mean, I always enjoyed babysitting. I did that for a long time, and
it feels like, from a perspective, an outside perspective, that your voice and your energy, and the fact that you're bringing a positive spin to what can be a very hard lifestyle, could be really a great influence on teenagers that are going through a similar path that you have.
And that's what I'd hope. I mean, I'm sure before we do that, we'll probably foster or do Big Brother, Big Sister or something.
Right.
It's hard having our life takes up so much time. And I love our life. And I'm kind of selfish. I don't want to share it yet. That's one of the reasons we aren't, looking at adopting now. It's like, I still want to spend more time with my husband and sleep in. And like the cats, if the cats have fits, I can put them in the bathroom and shut the door and go back to bed. And you aren't supposed to do that to kids. So,
You're not supposed to.
Yes.
People have. These are beautiful, very, very lovely getting to know you as well.
Thank you.
Through this. One thing that NAMI wanted me to ask, one thing that Sarah was coming up with is, have you been able to access safe housing and services? Is that hard? Because Nevada's 51st.
Yeah, Nevada's 51st. I haven't, because like I said, I'm I'm fortunate in that for the majority of my life, I was employed. My husband's employed, my parents, so I have resources. If you can't work because of your illness, if you can't work regularly, if you don't have that support, finding housing is difficult. If you think going to your general physician and having them tell you that you just need to breathe through your anxiety is hard, try going down to Social Security and telling them that you need to get on disability because of your head. And they were going to say, that's cool, give me 5 doctor records. Because unless, you're limping heavily along with your head, people still think it's not valid. And that's the hardest thing with mental illness, is it's an illness that's not considered valid by a lot of people.
Or physical, right?
Yeah, or physical.
Right.
If they can't see it, it's not there.
It's all in your head.
Literally. Which is the dumbest thing if you think about it, because your brain kind of makes everything else work.
Right.
So why wouldn't they think that a malfunction in your brain is legitimate?
Right, because they're not integrating their medicine. Oh, Meghan. Then another question that she asked, and I think this could be broader as well, because I think it's interesting for NAMI. Has your illness ever gotten you involved in law enforcement?
Fortunately, no.
Have you seen that from an outside perspective?
Fortunately, no, I haven't, but I have friends here who I know have, because of their health, had issues with law enforcement. I consider myself to be very fortunate along the scale of mental illness, because there are some mental illnesses that make you more prone to get into trouble, because not that you're doing anything wrong or worse than I'm doing. It's just your mental illness does it. And fortunately, depression and anxiety, I'm more likely to sit in my room all day than to go out and do something in public and get in trouble.
Right, like that bipolar ride.
Mm-hmm.
Can be pretty tough.
Yeah, that is really hard. I got to give people credit for handling that, because that's tough.
Yeah. I really appreciate you doing this. You have a
you.
beautiful story. And there's lots of fun things to be able to pull from this. And I think also things so that people can understand the journey that somebody takes.
Yeah.
And that's important. I might do some follow-up questions for you creatively.
Okay.
So, I like your story so much about that book and how it affected you.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that you tell a story back, I wanted to go back to the telescope story because it's beautiful. But how you are able to relate these stories to situations, the similes, the things that you say are just beautiful. So I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And we'll look through all of this, and I'm going to mine it for all I can. But I might follow up with you on a couple of things. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
For all of your honesty and
Of
your
course.
ability.
I hope
to
I
do
didn't
this
ramble
story.
too much. It's
Not at all.
hard to keep stuff straight sometimes.